right, so today we are finishing up our unit on animals. So we've been talking about vertebrates, we've talked about the different groups of fish, we talked about amphibians, reptiles, yesterday we talked about birds, and so today we're finishing this up by talking about mammals. So, mammal, the name actually refers to the fact that mammals have mammary glands. So let's talk a little bit about characteristics of mammals. So first of all, they are amniotes. Now remember, technically we talked about amniotes in the last lecture as meaning they made an amniotic egg. We don't actually make an amniotic egg other than very simple ones, but we do, when the babies develop inside of us, we have live birth, viviparous birth, and babies, when they do develop with an amnion, the amniotic sac, where the baby's inside, and then we have a placenta, and we have an umbilical cord where we feed the baby instead of yolk sac. So we are still considered an amniote. We are endothermic. We talked about how birds, this was a major advancement. Now the drawback is you have to eat a lot more, but the benefit is you have a lot more energy because you're getting, you're keeping your body at a steady body temperature, and so you can cool yourself down, you can warm yourself up, and you're not reliant on the environment to heat and cool you. So you can actually move to more places and do a lot more things. All mammals have hair, at least on some parts of their body. So if you think of things like whales and dolphins, they do have some hairs on them. But this is good on animals that have lots of hair. It's good for insulation. And then all mammals, the name comes from the mammary glands. So all mammals produce milk, which they use to feed their young. So unlike all the other animals we've talked about, even if they offer extended parental care, like birds are still basically puking up food they've partially digested and then feeding their young with that. We actually produce milk to feed our young, and our young, for the most part, develop inside of our bodies. So mammals have very efficient respiratory system. So actually, believe it or not, birds actually have a very efficient respiratory system. We didn't really talk about that yesterday, but birds have air sacs throughout their body. So their airflow is actually one direction. So unlike ours, where it goes into the lungs and it dissolves through the membranes of the alveoli, the little air sacs in the lungs, into the capillaries, which take it into our bloodstream, and then carbon dioxide diffuses out. And we exhale. So our air basically comes in and goes out the same way. Birds actually have a one-way respiratory system. So instead of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor air mixing together, they have these little tiny air sacs all over their body. And so they actually are more efficient at using oxygen than we are. But that makes sense because it takes a lot of energy to fly. So it makes sense that they have such a well-developed respiratory system for that purpose. Anyhow, we do have a similar circulatory system to birds. We have that four-chambered heart, which I mentioned completely separates oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So the blood can flow through our body, and it's a double pump. It pumps blood to the lungs and back, and then to the body and back. So and another thing, remember, birds had beaks. And reptiles pretty much just have teeth that are all pointy. We actually have differentiated teeth. So you'll see that we have like canines and incisors, molars, and this actually allows us to eat different kinds of diets. So, you can eat meat, you can eat plants, you can eat all kinds of things. Some mammals, I should say, like the ones in the group Carnivora, the order Carnivora, they tend to be meat eaters, but they still have, if you look in your dog's mouth, they do have different shaped teeth. And same with other mammals, cats and things like that. We're different. We have different specialized teeth really depending on what our diet is. Like rodents tend to have those big front teeth that grow their entire lives, so they tend to trim them down as they gnaw on things. Okay, so mammals can actually be divided into three main groups. So monotremes actually translates to, interestingly, one hole, or one opening. So it turns out, unlike other mammals, monotremes have a cloaca. So frogs had a cloaca, reptiles have a cloaca. It's basically one hole where everything goes out, pee, poop, everything. Well, monotremes actually have that too. So they're the only mammals that have that. So they don't have a separate, like, vaginal opening in the female, and then an opening for urine, and then an anal opening for poop. Monotremes pretty much have this one cloacal opening, but, so that's really where the name comes from. But what's unique about them is they are egg-laying mammals. So they actually do not have a placenta like a bird or a reptile. They lay eggs, but they do give milk to their young. And this would include the duck-billed platypus and what's called the spiny echidna. So they both lay eggs. Other mammals are actually born live. That's actually called viviparous, a live birth. And so we don't hatch our babies out of eggs. Another interesting fact, fun fact about monotremes is that they do not have nipples. So if you think of the duck-billed platypus, it has a bill, like a beak. So there'd be no way for it to suck milk. So they actually sweat out the milk through modified sweat glands. So I remember seeing an episode of Phineas and Ferb, and they were making a joke about Perry, and Candace says to him, "Are you sweating milk?" And it was kind of funny because it was a sort of a science reference, but obviously kids wouldn't actually get it. Anyway, the embryos of the other mammals, marsupials, that's our second group. Those are the ones with pouches. And then eutherians, that's actually what you call the ones that have a placenta that fully develop inside of a uterus, and then they give birth to the baby later on. So marsupials, although they have a placenta, they actually give birth to an embryo. So I don't know if you've ever seen a video of a kangaroo giving birth, but the baby is like the size of your thumbnail. And they do not offer it any care. It's born as an embryo. So it'd be like if you gave birth at like 6 weeks of pregnancy. This little tiny embryo, it doesn't even have legs yet. It just has hands. And it actually climbs up into the pouch. It attaches to a nipple inside the pouch, and then it grows there. It does not become detached. So when you see pictures of like a kangaroo and the baby's like popping in and out of the pouch, that's much, much later on. Early on, the baby is just an embryo. It doesn't even have fully developed legs or anything. It's hairless. It's actually pretty gross looking, and it climbs into that pouch, and then it develops there. So imagine if we gave birth at like 6 weeks of pregnancy, and then the baby hooked onto your breast and basically hung there for the other, 8 months of pregnancy as it grew on the outside. That's basically what's happening with a marsupial. So we are eutherians, placental mammals, and we give birth to fully developed young. Now, when I say fully developed, that's questionable because obviously, for example, human babies are born with their eyes open, but puppies and kittens are born with their eyes closed. So our young still, in most cases, need to be nurtured for quite some time before they can live on their own, but they're definitely not an embryo. They have fully developed arms, legs, the lungs, all of that stuff is fully developed. Going back to our chart here, remember we were going through the different kinds of hearts. So remember the fish, just 2 chambers, had to pump the blood all the way around the body in one pump. The amphibians and reptiles had a 3-chambered heart, so they did separate so that the blood wasn't going all the way to the lungs and the body. Here they had to go to the gills and the body and back. Here just goes to the lungs, just goes to the body, but the blood mixed in the bottom chamber. 4-chambered heart, this is the bird and the mammal, completely separated oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. So one side of the heart, its whole goal is to collect blood from the body, send it to the lungs to pick up oxygen. The other side of the heart, its entire job is to take the blood that's full of oxygen, pump it out to the rest of the body. And that biggest blood vessel, the aorta, is the one that's pumping the blood out to go to the entire body. So this is a monotreme. So see, even as babies, these have hatched out of the egg. They still actually get milk from the mother, but they lick it off the mother, which is pretty gross. This is a marsupial, and again, we're showing a baby here that's pretty fully developed. Remember, when it's first born, I'll try to pull a video for class to show you guys. When they're first born, they're like the size of a dime, and they have to crawl in to the pouch. And then here is our placental mammals. Here's a zebra. This is the placenta actually falling off. In the wild, the mom will oftentimes eat that placenta because it provides a rich source of protein and nutrition so that she can then take care of that baby that she's going to have to give milk to. And notice how some of these babies are born, they can already stand, they can already walk, whereas like with puppies and kittens, and mice, they're born and they can barely move around. These guys are up and walking in a couple of hours. And that makes sense because it depends on their lifestyle. If they live in the African savanna, if the mom was stuck there watching that baby for 3 weeks, she'd probably get eaten by a lion before she could get that baby up and moving around. So it makes sense that the babies are born at a little bit of a later stage, that they can sort of fend for themselves. Even though they drink milk, they can still move around.
The wolves in the...
Sorry, we're going to skip the wolf video here. We're going to skip this too. And that's actually the end of our chapter. So these are all the things that you should know. Know the general characteristics of chordates. Remember, there were 4 of them. We want to know the characteristics of the different vertebrate groups. So the hagfish and the lampreys were the jawless fish. Chondrichthyes, or chondrichthyans, these were cartilage fish like sharks. Ray-finned and lobe-finned fish, I talked about them being an osteichthyes, which is osteo for bone and ichthy for fish. These guys had real bones, but the lobe-finned fish had thicker bones in their limbs, which led to the tetrapods, the animals that could live on land, which brings us to what we've been talking about: amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. This, you're actually not going to be tested on transitional species, but you should know that the lobed-finned fish are the ones that we believe gave rise to the amphibians, because they are the ones with the bone structure that led to living on land. Some of them also, like lungfish, have primitive lungs, so it makes sense that this would lead to the amphibians. The difference between, remember, monotremes, these are the mammals that laid eggs. Marsupials, those are the ones with pouches. And then placental mammals are what we are. And then we actually cut this part out. So if you go into study and you're looking at this list of things, you actually do not have to know the details on primates and humans, hominids or hominids, humans, and how we, we got our posture, upright posture in our brain and all of that, which is very interesting, but we're not going to have time to get into it. All right, so good luck with your studying, and it's our last chapter, last lecture from me, so good luck.